So obviously, why are you turn a little bit?
Okay, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Counselor Connect session. My name is Amanda Callahan. I am a student counseling consultant, and I need to mute somebody here. Just give me 1 second. Please go ahead and mute yourselves if you are not already muted, and just stay muted throughout the session. Thank you. Okay. So we are very excited for today's session, which is appreciating, affirming, and supporting gender diverse students. Before we start, I want to share just a little bit about Counselor Connect for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. Counselor Connect falls under the Keep Indiana Learning umbrella. Counselor Connect and Keep Indiana Learning are both operated by the Central Indiana Educational Service Center, which is located in Indianapolis, but our initiatives reach statewide. Counselor Connect is a community of practice for student service professionals. It's led by practitioners through 4 Counselor Connect tactic teams. Those teams include comprehensive school counseling, post-secondary options, social emotional learning, and student and family advocacy. Today's speaker was recommended by one of our tactic team members, and we look forward to the presentation. So this session will be presented by Emma Vosky, Executive Director of Gender Nexus, and we are very thrilled to have Emma with us today. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Emma so that we have plenty of time to hear all the information that she has to share. So thank you, Emma.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to start. Oh, I get to see blank faces for a moment. I will tell you this ahead of time, just so you know, in case you're still in your bathrobe. We're going to do an exercise at some point about a third or so of the way through. And I'm going to ask you to turn on your cameras. So I'm just giving everybody a heads up ahead of time. And I'll explain as we go why it's useful for everybody to be seen at that moment. So let me start here as I go to share my materials. I am the Executive Director for Gender Nexus. We're based in Indianapolis. We serve all of Indiana. And our mission is very straightforward. Our sole reason for existing is to empower gender diverse people. So we work, and we're actually one of a handful of agencies anywhere in the US, social service agencies, that work solely with the transgender, non-binary population, gender diverse. I will be shortening things as I go. So as opposed to transgender non-binary, I'll just say trans non-binary. But we work with all gender diverse individuals and their families and the systems that support them so that they can lead healthy and lives that are healthy, that are authentic to who they are, and that are joyful. And we very much emphasize joyful because there is nothing quite like the feeling of who you are at your core, aligning with and being free to express who you are in the world. I will tell you, there is nothing like it. Our vision is Indiana-based because of who we are. And what we want to see in the end is that gender diverse people of all backgrounds, so regardless of income level, race, ethnicity, belief systems, abilities, are able to feel loved and accepted and welcomed. And welcomed is very, very different from tolerated, and valued for their unique selves, because each of us is unique, and each individual who is trans, non-binary, gender diverse is unique, and they bring their uniqueness into your schools, into your classrooms, into your counseling sessions. And so that they're valued for that uniqueness, and that they get to have autonomy, as most other people do, over their identities and bodies, and freedom from disrespect, discrimination, oppression, and violence. Transgender Day of Remembrance is coming up a week from Saturday, which is a time when, unfortunately, those of us who are gender diverse, stop to remember all of the individuals who have died simply because of who they are. They happen to be gender diverse. Just to give you kind of a general idea of where I'm going today, and I will tell you that at times I talk ridiculously fast, and so I will try to slow down. I'm also trying to cover a lot of material. You will see over time that there will probably be slides that I will skip because I always have my phone nearby so that I have a sense of what the time is, and I know that there are certain things that I really want to touch on. And I will tell you ahead of time that one of the places I'm going to place emphasis is right up in front in terms of discussing the trans non-binary experience. And there's a reason for doing that. And I promise that we will get to specific things that you can do for the kids with whom you work. But my sense has always been that if individuals don't have an appreciation for who other individuals are, what drives them, the issues that they face, that you can do all of the nice stuff in the world that you want, but it's not going to be driven by this underlying desire out of appreciation for someone else as to how to make their life better and why you'd want to do that. So we're going to take some time to discuss the trans non-binary experience. We're going to talk about the price that those of us who are trans and non-binary, and by the way, I happen to be a trans woman, the price that we're often required to pay just for living who we are. I'm going to talk about some stats, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time unless we have more time. My guess is we won't. So I'll kind of brush across some statistics. There is a whole separate conversation regarding applicable law and how that law applies to the school experience in terms of policies, et cetera. We'll talk about that to a certain extent, but consider this a survey course. Terminology we will go to because it's good to know. And then we'll talk about what the kids in your care need from you. So let's start. So that you know, this is I know the term safe space gets thrown around a lot. So I have refined it a touch that it is a safe space for your questions. I have been doing presentations for, I don't know, 12, 14 years. And have always said that I am totally open to questions. And I don't think in all of that time there's ever been a question that I haven't responded to. So please feel safe that you can ask. There are no dumb questions. If you do not happen to be gender diverse, this is not your experience. And so you might have even more questions. Plus, you get to do something today that you normally do not get to do with the students and children with whom you work. You get to ask me questions. The students, we'll talk about this later, the students, the kids, anybody you happen to know who's gender diverse, they don't have a responsibility or an obligation to explain their lives to you, just as you don't have an obligation to go into all of the specifics of matters that are private to you. So please ask. And if you have a question in the middle, I think Amanda is watching questions and chats and things like that. And Amanda, please feel free if you see something to break in and let me know that there's a specific question, and I'm happy to deal with it on the spot. So just as we get going, I want you to take a moment and just take a breath for a moment, and I'll stop talking quickly for this second, just to say that I'd like you to just sit for a second and think about some time in your life or multiple times in your life when you were not seen, or when you were ridiculed or mocked for some way in which you were different, because we all have differences. Even those of us who are most homogeneously close to the majority narrative, we all carry differences. And sometime when somebody else made you feel incredibly uncomfortable, unaccepted, rejected for who you were. And that could have been in school. I mean, lots of us have those experiences to pull from middle school, unfortunately. But it can be in your job. It could be in a community gathering. It could be in your townhome association where your neighbors don't like something about you that makes you different from them. And I want you to just sit with that feeling. And then I want you to recognize that for individuals who are trans and non-binary, they're often left to feel not seen and ridiculed and mocked for each and every day of their life. So that feeling that you have experienced, exponentialize it. And that's what the students, that's what the kids with whom you're working are experiencing. I want to talk about the classic phrase, I don't get it. I don't understand this. I can't wrap my head around it. I don't understand how this works. And it took me some time to realize that, at least from my perspective, the best answer is, just breathe. It's not about getting it. Because the reality is, unless you happen to be gender diverse, you're not going to get it. It's not your experience. And it took me, I developed a friendship with a few years back with this woman of color who had just the most amazing life and had been through some experiences, multiple experiences that made me wonder how she ever came out the other side. And she did very successfully. And as we would spend late into the night exchanging stories, I realized I will never know what it is like to be a woman of color living in America. I won't. It is not my experience. But that doesn't mean that I can't listen and learn and try to take in as many stories as I can and appreciate that there are people with other experiences that impact who they are. And develop empathy for that, and develop an understanding that just because something is not my experience does not mean that it is not a valid experience. So many of us want to say, well, if I don't get it, if this isn't, individuals who are heterosexual, well, I have no idea what it's like to be attracted to somebody of the same sex as I. Well, of course, you're not going to get it because that's not the experience that you've had. But there's a huge desire to diminish another human being's experience because it's not yours. So the corollary to, yes, you're not going to have the same experience. You're never going to completely get it. But the fact that it's not your experience doesn't mean that it's invalid in any way. So as we're talking about individuals who are gender diverse, as opposed to the I don't get it or, oh, this is too complex, I'd ask you to actually look at the students around you who are gender diverse and recognize that you are looking at the incredible beauty of the universe, that we are actually, that there is something awesome about the diversity in our universe, that there is a diversity of experiences, that there is a diversity of understanding, and that actually is about richness. It's not something to be afraid of. And something for all of us to keep in mind, we all have gender identity. So when you're thinking, oh, those people over there who are trans, and they're talking about gender identity, that's just hogwash. No, the truth is we all have it. We all have this deeper psychological understanding of ourselves. It's just that if your understanding of yourself aligns with the narrative for the sex that was assigned to you at birth, you're not going to think about it. It's just going to become second nature. When I was looking through my slides this morning, I was thinking about back when I was in college, so we'll say a few decades ago, I popped my lung in the midst of playing racquetball. breathing came naturally to me. I never gave it a second thought. It was just something that happened. When suddenly things were out of line, I suddenly realized how important breathing is. And this thing that always was just this underlying subtext in my life suddenly took on an incredible amount of importance. So gender identity, and speaking about this for myself and on behalf of my community, and I do want to emphasize, because I will talk slightly about my story just to give a little deeper understanding about how our movement has changed. My gendered identity is one part of me. So I happen to be an attorney, a business attorney. I just took on the job as executive director of Gender Nexus within the last just under a year. I am a mother and a grandmother. I am an advocate. I am a member of multiple choirs and have been over time. I have been on the board of multiple nonprofits. I am the executive director of a nonprofit. I am a public speaker. I do storytelling at storytelling events. And I also am a trans woman. The fact that I am trans is one part of me. It does not define all of me by any stretch. And yet it is an essential part of me, because your gender identity is actually absolutely core to who you are. So for a moment, as we get into this conversation, we're going to talk about sex. And for all of you who are going, I didn't sign up for a conversation on sex, don't worry about it. It is not the way the term is usually used. We're going to talk about sex as it shows up on driver's license, birth certificates, all of these good places, because this is what creates some of the consternation in school settings, in business settings, in life in general. Sex is it's a designation. It is simply a designation that is placed on a birth certificate. It's a designation that's placed on a driver's license, and that designation carries with it multiple social, legal, medical implications. If on my birth certificate M is placed on there, there are certain beliefs as to how I should act, with whom I should interact, what types of things I should be interested in, what types of medical care I need, and the legal rights that I have. All of that happens when a doctor happens to look at you at the time of your birth, and based on and I want to emphasize, an often cursory assessment of an individual's body says male, female. And what happens at that moment sticks with a human being for the rest of their lives. I will note for you, though, that even that cursory assessment has issues. There is clearly not going to be enough time to talk about this, but there are scales that exist, at least two different scales. I think it's Prater and Quigley, because it's not always possible just from a cursory look to determine if somebody is male or female. In fact, the determination of sex that's assigned at birth is incredibly incomplete. This is why, if you pay attention to some of the issues during the Olympics, it's probably for almost the last 20 years, the determination of sex, as that term is used, even for purposes of the Olympics, that is an issue that is complex. They do not base it solely upon certain external factors. There's an incredible affidavit from the director of pediatric endocrinology at Duke University. There's a reference at the bottom of this slide. I will have resources at the end of all my slides, and I will be sharing those. That director of pediatric endocrinology said this, that sex-related characteristics include external genitalia, which we all assume is what is determinative, but it also includes internal reproductive organs, gender identity, chromosomes, secondary sex characteristics, and genes. there is a richness of how individuals develop and all of the switches that go on and off and do not always go on and off in the pattern that we would expect. At some point, do a little bit, if you want to appreciate this more, do a little bit of research around individuals who are intersex. There are somewhere between 40 to 50 different conditions, situations that can lead to individuals being intersex. Things as basic as certain cell receptors that will not accept testosterone. And because of that, certain sex characteristics do not develop, even though the genes and chromosomes are saying, yeah, this is supposed to happen. It's really understanding individuals who are intersex is a way to appreciate how complex all of these issues actually are. So I'm going to talk about myself very, very briefly, and only for this reason, because I think it helps to understand the experience from one person's perspective. My story is not monolithic. There is no such thing as a monolithic story. When you finish today, do not go home tonight and say, well, I now understand exactly what it means to be trans and non-binary. No, what you understand is my experience and my ability to interpret that for you. If I ever get to this slide, which I probably won't, it will say one of the things you should be doing is educating, and educating yourself, and then educate other people. I have some resources at the end. Please feel free to contact Gender Nexus. We are there, I forgot to mention. We provide services and support and community and connection to resources for individuals who are trans and non-binary, anywhere from small kids, because we work with Riley Hospital, has a gender health clinic, incredible organization that does incredible work with remarkable doctors. And we work with them to provide a variety of the social services for the individuals who pass through their program. And then we provide services anywhere to for individuals ages 18 to somewhere in their 70s, I think is the oldest so far. So we're there. Please always feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And if you'd like more resources, I will get you to more resources. So let's talk about, for a moment, growing up trans a long time ago. So we can all assume that I am old, and multiple decades so. And so at the time that I was a kid, and actually until probably somewhere closer to my 30s, there was no vocabulary. All of the language we're going to talk about today, almost none of that existed. And because there is no vocabulary, there is no means for me to articulate the experience that I was having, to say, I feel this way. Why is it that I keep understanding myself as a girl? There was just no way to discuss that. The only thing that I had was a sense that there was something about me that was different in this way, that for some reason I understood myself to be female, and no way to deal with that or to express it. And then that sense just grew into a knowing. And it's a long story. I do storytelling, especially in the Chicago area where I'm originally from, for a group called Outspoken. And there's a whole long story around the moment when it finally clicked for me when I was 15. I happened to run across a magazine article that talked about individuals who were, as the term was used at the time, transsexual. By the way, a term that's pretty rarely used anymore. And in going through that magazine, there was a photo at the beginning of the story, a photo of a young woman who is transgender. And I looked at the photo, and in that moment, I knew. I saw this woman and I knew who I was. It was there. And I will say this much, the same phrase came up for me, but in two different intonations. The phrase was, "Oh God." And part of it was, oh God, I finally see myself for the first time. Who I am makes sense. And the other was, oh God, no, 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 don't do this to me, because I will lose everything. And unfortunately, that turned out to be clairvoyance on my part. Conversation for another day. So what happens for many individuals like myself who are trans and non-binary is that we are constantly swimming upstream against the narrative of who we are told we are, based upon the fact that a doctor happened to decide that an F or M should go on our birth certificate. And we are constantly trying to get home. And the best image that I could find was the one that's in front of you. It is that sense that salmon have, that there is a place where they belong, there is a place they need to go, and they will fight to get there. And the same is true for individuals who are trans and non-binary. And you can't stand in the way if you wish. You can put walls there, you can put fences up, you can electrify the water so they can't make it all the way. But the only thing that you will have accomplished is damaging another human being. And if for some reason you think that damaging another human being is the way you need to go with your life, there's probably some introspection that's needed there. Then this is the price that's paid for any of us who happen to be trans, non-binary, gender diverse. And it's a Hobbesian choice. If I disclose, the price I'm going to pay is punishment and loss. The people around me will punish me for being different because I won't conform to the narrative, and I will lose. And the stats, there's an incredible survey by National Center for Transgender Equality. The last one was out in 2015. The things that individuals who are trans non-binary have lost is just painful to read. And then there's the other choice. Okay, so I don't disclose. I go along with the narrative. I'm going to hide. Then what happens is this, and as you suggest to students that you're working with in terms of, maybe this is not the best time, just keep in mind that what you're asking them to do is this, that they are going to go through this grinding of gears, that there is going to be this feeling where nothing seems to mesh, nothing seems to make sense. It is painful to be present to. There is going to be, for a number of individuals who are trans and non-binary, dysphoria. It is not necessarily true for everyone. But to the extent there is that dysphoria, that sense that who you are doesn't match up how you are seen in the world and how you have to present yourself in the world, that feeling is enhanced by having to hide. There's damage to physical and mental health. We'll talk about statistics in a little bit. And I think the best thing, I shouldn't say best thing, the most accurate description I have ever heard was from a friend of mine years back, and who had finally transitioned and said to me that that now being on the other side, they realized that they had been living a nightmare their whole life. And that is the feeling. That is the feeling that your kids and your students are going through. And to the extent that you try to force them to live that nightmare, think about it, period. You ask anybody to live a nightmare, there is a price that's going to be paid. I do not, though, want to step away from this piece of this conversation without this. There is also joy. Being able to live in a way in which your life is aligned with your core understanding of yourself is absolutely joyous. There is no other word to describe having the world make sense and come together. So much about me. Let's talk about present day. God, now it sounds like I'm not in the present day. So I'm a little older. Anyway, present day, the development in the trans non-binary community, the changes that have occurred, the growth that has occurred in our community really relates to context and to the process. And it's not about numbers. So, there's this whole thing about as I was much younger, and I'd hear this whole thing about, there's this gay lesbian agenda. and that more people were coming out, that somehow being true to who you are and saying who you were caused other people to become something they weren't. Nobody becomes something that they aren't. But when you have a chance to see other individuals who are living their lives true to who they are, you're much more likely to come out. So if there's an increase in numbers, it's not because there's any statistical difference in that way. It's about people who actually feel safe enough to say who they are. And that development and growth is what's really triggered the trans non-binary movement. We're kind of at the cutting edge right now of the LGBTQ plus movement. And that's good that finally we are, and it's bad that it's just now that we are. But what has triggered this movement is this, and I raise this because you're going to see this occur. It's that there's now vocabulary. I had no vocabulary when I was growing up. There is vocabulary, and now there are persons who have the courage to speak their words out loud because they're hearing other voices around them. And so this means that as this happens, there's vocabulary and people who are willing to say who they are. It means that for those of you who might not be gender diverse in any way, and given the fact it's a spectrum, there might be more people there who actually realize or really want to talk about it. But for those who are not gender diverse, grab a seat, because what you are witnessing is just a microcosm of the history of knowledge. This is how knowledge develops, that there is vocabulary. That vocabulary, once there are words, that creates language. This is happening in our community right now. And it's been happening really for the last 10, 15 years. That as that language develops, that there is a way for individuals who are trans non-binary to communicate and to discuss their experiences with other people. We're no longer hiding in the shadows. We're actually having these conversations. Those conversations create tons of disagreements because everybody has, even if you're trans non-binary, different experiences. That leads to a greater awareness of what it means to be gender diverse. A greater awareness drives people towards change. And once you get to change, you start all over again. And so what's going to happen is you're going to be watching this process, and this process is going to be moving and moving fast. So as you start thinking to yourself, I just got the vocabulary down last week. I cannot believe that somebody is changing the vocabulary on me. Appreciate that that is occurring because knowledge is moving so quickly right now. People who have been told to stay quiet are finally having conversations, and those conversations are leading to knowledge at an absolutely increased rate. There are benefits and detriments to knowledge. One of the benefits is that once you know, it's much more difficult to ignore who you are. You will find this with your students. The more comfortable that they become with themselves, the more they understand themselves, the more they're going to ask to have who they are respected, the more they are going to demand their rights. So you might have a child right now who says, you know what, using the bathroom down the hallway, I know that means I'm missing class, I have to run all the way down there. It creates a certain level of stigma, but I'm willing to live with that for now. As they're going on in the course of this journey for themselves, there's going to be a time, more likely than not, when they're going to say, I'm done with this. I want to be respected for who I am. I have heard more from the people around me about what rights I have. And so they're going to ask for those. Do not put that down as, oh God, here we go again. You're asking for more stuff. We just gave you everything, blah, blah, blah. People have a right to ask what they have a right to in order to be respected and honored. And that's going to grow, and that's going to create issues, and that's just the beauty of life. And so as it happens, there's going to be greater knowledge enrichment, and what always happens with new knowledge. New ideas, and this is true of all of us. It is true for me in settings that might not relate to issues around gender diversity, but new ideas upset us. They upset the apple cart. They make our lives more difficult. They can create anger because we all want life to be simple. And so that's why in a moment we will talk about the binary. So the advent of non-binary concepts, this is probably the cutting edge piece of the trans non-binary cutting edge. It started 10, 12 years ago under what was called at the time the gender queer movement. The way that, for me, the shortest hand way to describe it, especially as I've watched it develop, and it develops with, so congrats, you happen to be in school settings. It is most on the edge for individuals who are teenagers, 20s, maybe early 30s. That they're grappling with this concept much more, that they're much more open to it. So you are going to be, fortunately or unfortunately, if change is a struggle for you, you're going to be watching this happen fast in your schools. The best way that I have found to describe non-binary concepts is what I've heard from various students, which is, why can't I just be and live and express, whether it's in terms of dress or my voice, or if I like makeup or I don't like makeup? Why can't I just do that in the way that feels most whole to me? And how does that change your life? How does that really impact who you are, other than telling me whom I can't be? And that's really, that is the piece, the philosophy that's being driven by this whole understanding that gender, just like sexuality, is a spectrum, that there are multiple points, that there are multiple expressions. I like to use this one, this slide, and I can't tell if if I'm just looking at the screen share of mine or if it blocks out yours. But when I'm talking with people, and this will happen for me in my agency, there are a number of people who volunteer and work and are on our board who are far younger than I, and they are constantly bringing in new ideas, which is fascinating and challenging. And so so that you have perspective. In any field that's new and developing and outside our usual area of expertise, it can be a little overwhelming. For me, astrophysics is an area that is constantly changing, that is constantly in discussion. And I have now read multiple articles about how black holes bend space-time. And those people are astrophysicists, will have these Socratic dialogues around it. I'm the person over on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm the person who's like, really? You can bend space-time? And let's even forget about bending. Would somebody please explain what space-time is to me? Because I still don't understand it. That is where I am. That's okay. That doesn't mean that astrophysicists don't have a right to have their discussions and that they won't be moving along at a pace that makes me go, oh, I finally got around to finally reading Stephen Hawking's material from 20 years ago. And now that, pieces of it are just totally useless. The same thing is going to happen for you in regard to individuals, students, kids that you're working with who are gender diverse. They will, because they have to live it, they have to understand it, they have to experience it, they have to discuss it. They will be talking about gender at levels that you won't, at levels that will make you go, what the heck? It will be to the level of Socratic dialogues for them. For those of us, well, I can't say of us, but for individuals who are not gender diverse, for whom this is not a conversation that they need to have all the time, you're all going to be where I am in terms of bending space-time. These are going to be brand new concepts. You're going to be going, what? Except the fact that there is a truth out there that might not be yours, that there's a truth of experience, and that people are going to be moving ahead at this at breakneck speed. So this is the moment at which I get rid of, if I can figure out how to do this, I think I can, get rid of my screen for a moment and say to you, if you no longer have your bathrobes, it's time to turn on your screen for a minute, if you would be so kind. Because we're going to do a little exercise, because I think it's important to understand the experience of being non-binary. So for those of you who are willing to go there. We're going to do this. I am going to ask you a series of questions. You cannot think. You are not allowed to think. You have to respond one way or the other. You only have two choices. If it's one choice, you raise your right hand. If it's the other choice, you raise your left hand. I know they're probably on the screen. You're looking at the opposite hand on me. Sorry, I'm not good at reversing this. So no thoughts and no middle ground here. Everybody who has black hair, raise your right hand. Everybody who has blonde hair, raise your left hand. We're not all playing. Come on. Everybody who's athletic, raise your right hand. Everybody who's artistic, raise your left hand. You don't get to raise both hands. You only get to choose one. So if you're athletic, right. If you're artistic, left. Everybody who is short, raise your right hand. Everybody who's tall, raise your left hand. Everybody who is lazy, raise your right hand. Everybody who's highly motivated, raise your left hand. If you love your job, raise your right hand. If you hate your job, raise your left hand. If you're concerned with a category, when you didn't fit into a category, how did you choose? How did you make that decision? And if we had time, I'd go through and ask you to actually tell me. So I just want you to think about it for now. And then I'm curious about your reactions to some of the wording choices. Some of those wording choices were very judgmental and very negative. We have certain, there are connotations connected to lazy. There are connotations attached to highly motivated. And yet there's a lot to be said for being lazy. There's a lot to be said for actually being, I'm a little bit of a type A, so I struggle to understand this. I don't get this experience, but I am told that there is a lot to be said for actually being able to take time for yourself. And yet the wording in there has certain connotations attached. This is what happens to our kids, the students that we happen to work with. We ask them to fit into a box. We ask them to say that they are either male or that they are female. And then we ask them to act that way. And there is no ground in between. They are forced to make this choice, despite the fact that neither of those binaries make any sense to them. And there are all kinds of negative connotations connected to somebody who won't live according to that. So just so you have some sense of what the universe is like for your students, as in the kids that you work with as you're going through this, as they're going through this experience. I might not be able to, I'm not going to waste time because I know we only have limited to make my screen even larger. Hopefully this works still. And I actually then have to get back to where I was. So bear with me just for a second. I hadn't thought about the fact that this would, good, let's do an exercise, is easy to see. So let's talk about the benefits of being supported and affirmed, what we talked about already, joy. That affirmed name and use based on studies actually, or using somebody's affirmed name, lowers levels of depression and suicidal ideation and behaviors. And for those of you who are, because this is Counselor Connect, who are there for your students, I'd like you to remember this, that according to a recent Trevor Project study, that having just one accepting, for an individual who's trans non-binary, having one accepting adult in that individual's life makes it 40% less likely that they are going to attempt suicide in a given year. So the fact that you are there for them, you are actually doing the most implicit form of suicide prevention. You are saving lives by being at least the one adult, and then by trying to create a world where there are more welcoming adults and accepting adults. And I do not mean tolerating. Tolerance is what we talk about with steel. You know, steel, it won't break up to a certain point. We're not here to learn to be tolerating of other human beings of any race, ethnicity, color, gender, sexuality. We're here to be welcoming of them.
Emma,
And
Emma, can you
yes,
hear me? This is Amanda. Sorry to interrupt you.
no
Do you want to
problem.
hit your resume slideshow there so we can see your
Oh,
slide a little bit bigger?
yeah, thank you.
You see that?
Yep, let me see if I
Perfect.
can. Ah,
Thank you.
perfect.
Perfect.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Marvelous, I appreciate it. Recent study out of Europe, uh, um, working with a group of transgender kids, indicates that fully supported trans kids, so not only in their family, but in their educational systems, their social systems, that they are as well adjusted as their cis peers, cisgender peers. That what occurs that increases rates of suicidality, depression, anxiety is the world around. It is not being who you are. It's the world that sits around you. Again, keep that in mind within your educational settings. We're going to talk really briefly. I'm going to hit just a couple of statistics, and then you're going to see that I'm going to skip over statistics. I will leave these in the slides. Most recent Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, lesson, survey from the newest one is under its way right now, so it's out of 2019. Over 200,000 students surveyed. 86% of students experienced harassment or assault in school. 90% of all LGBTQ students heard homophobic or transphobic remarks. 92% felt distress due to that language. Yeah. 59% felt unsafe in their schools. More than one out of every two of the gender diverse kids in your school do not feel safe. And this is the one that's just brutal. So roughly, the numbers are always kind of open to interpretation. Probably somewhere between 6 to 8% of the general population in the United States is LGBTQ. Of the homeless youths in the United States, 40% of them are LGBTQ. So even though we only make up 8% of the population, we make up 40% of the kids who are homeless. And that's because they're thrown out of their homes. There's abuse that comes for being who they are. Keep that in mind, that the kids that you are working with are going to have all of these stressors sitting in their lives, often unseen. There are all kinds of results in terms of how it impacts missing school, lowers GPAs, twice as likely to not report, looking at post-secondary plans. If you went through what you went through in middle school and high school, how excited are you really going to be about wanting to go back into another institutional school setting again? Also, twice as likely to have been disciplined. Whole conversation around the school to prison pipeline, which exists for individuals of color, also exists for individuals who are trans and non-binary. And when there's that intersectionality of being an individual of color who happens to be trans and non-binary, things only become worse. And so often, to protect themselves, trans non-binary kids will choose homeschooling. And homeschooling is certainly an option. It is an option that works for a number of individuals. It is not the option for everybody. And when it is a child who is staying home to homeschool because it is not safe, then the socialization opportunities that they want, they need, aren't going to be there for them. I'm going to skip this one for a moment. Oh, I am missing the one I was looking for. So I will tell you this, maybe I'll find it at some point. That the schools do this now. The schools, it is not unusual. This is not all schools, but it is not unusual for many schools to administrations to herd gender diverse kids towards homeschooling. They don't provide the resources. They don't have your back. There is this suggestion of, if you weren't this way, this wouldn't be happening to you. So there's blaming the student. And then there's always this, if you want to use homeschooling so you feel more safe, that is certainly an option. Now, is that an option that can be presented? Of course it could, because it is an option. Is it being presented, though, because it's easier for the administration to do that than to face the bullying that's occurring in their school that might have something to do with some of the teachers in their own school? Which, if I can find it, yes, this is the perfect time for this stat out of the Gleason National Survey. 2 years ago, trust me, things have not gotten better. In their study, 13.7% of LGBTQ students reported that staff intervened when hearing homophobic remarks, which means that 86.3% of all LGBTQ students did not have staff step in when homophobic remarks were made. 9% of LGBTQ students reported school staff intervening when overhearing negative remarks about gender expression. The flip of that, 91% of all students have had teachers, administrators stand there, hear stuff and do nothing. And the usual sell-off is, oh, kids will be kids, you know, this happens. And what's really happening, because I don't know if we'll get to that slide, is neutrality equals complicity. And for those of you who have kids, I had 3. If there is one thing that my kids were totally home to, it was where I wasn't going to be pressing them to act in a way that was the best for them, for the household. The short term is, if they could get away with it, and I sent the message that they could get away with it, dang, they took it just about every time. That's what happens in schools. Kids who are bullies watch the teachers stand there. They watch the administrators stand there. They watch the administrators blame the trans non-binary student for the fact that they're being bullied. And the bully says, okay, it's field days. I can go where I want to on this one. That's the message that's being sent. This is the last stat I'll touch on. 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. Over 50% of trans non-binary youth did. And the suicide attempts are 12% for individuals who are trans non-binary and happen to be white. And then as intersectionality goes, it only gets worse. Native Indigenous individuals, youth, 31% of them. 31% of them attempted suicide in the last year. 21% of Black youth, 21% of multiracial youth, 18% of Latinx, 12% of Asian Pacific Islander. This is going on in your schools. If you have 10 kids who happen to be trans non-binary, odds are one of them is going to fall into these categories. And in terms of seriously considering, you have 10 kids that are probably 4.2% of those kids, or 4.2 of those, 4.2 out of 10 kids who are considering suicide. Something to remember in regard to trans non-binary kids. Those kids who disclose, and nobody has an obligation to disclose who they are to you. And as kids are younger and make social transitions earlier, because you cannot make medical transitions until you are into your teens, that's not even possible. And even those transitions are very limited. So more and more of the kids that you have will have transitioned socially even before they've walked into your schools. They don't have an obligation to disclose who they are to you. Those individuals who do disclose, they have just made themselves incredibly vulnerable to you. Please keep that in mind. They've just given you their underbelly. And they are probably already walking into the classroom, into the office, feeling wounded, unless they happen to be some of those really fortunate kids who are surrounded by a supportive system, including supportive family. And when you're thinking, well, this kid really doesn't want to talk with me, you know, they're not telling me where they're at. You know what? If you went through your life with feeling continually under attack, you would be pretty wary and measuring also. You would be waiting for each person around you to take another shot. And so they thought of, is this going to happen again? Is going to be in your students' minds. We'll talk briefly about applicable school law, a whole area, and I want to be certain that I get to things to keep in mind as you're working with kids. Indiana laws protecting trans non-binary students? Yeah, those don't exist. The underlying theory is, hey, good luck, kid. Hope you make it. So, and something to keep in mind, every legislative season, and it is happening now more and more because trans non-binary kids are now the new wedge issue. And so it's a great way to drum up support. It's a great way to drum up contributions, is to suggest legislation that tells gender diverse kids that when they need medically affirming care, they're not going to be able to get it. They're going to have to go out of state in order to find it. That stigmatizes them in one way or another. Every time though that type of legislation is proposed, it has a statistically detrimental impact on the individuals who are the subject of that legislation. If there was a lot of time, I would tell you all about a study out of San Francisco State back in about 2006, 2007, when there were constitutional amendments to ban same-sex marriage. In those states that had those constitutional amendments proposed, regardless of whether they were actually passed or not, there were statistically significant increases in anxiety and depression amongst LGBTQ individuals. Just being told day in, day out, turning on the news and seeing somebody say that you are a defective human being is damaging. That's actually almost common sense to any of us. If we have ever had that situation, just somebody in our family who was who put us down consistently, you know how that takes its own toll. Watch for this with your kids. The start of the next legislative season is in January. In Indiana, I'm a transplant, so my understanding is still a little fresh. My understanding is that the legislative season for 2022 is a little shorter, probably January into April, and I could be slightly off on that. But expect that there are going to be increased levels of anxiety and depression for the kids that you are working with. They might not even know why. They're just being surrounded by these messages being sent to them. Federal law that protects Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, that no person can be discriminated against, excluded from participation in, or denied the benefits of schools on the basis of sex. The Department of Education and the Department of Justice interpret this, and they now almost have to, based on a ruling that relates to Title VII. So only a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, only a lawyer would love this, but the interpretation of this almost exact same language in Title VII relating to employment is used in Title IX relating to schools. Discriminating against a student because of their gender identity is a violation of Title IX. There are also other things that need to be kept in mind as you are talking with your administrations. FERPA, which protects student records, and that includes portions of their records relating to sex and gender. So keep in mind that, and I know this is not a perfect crossover, but we all know the risks with HIPAA and violating HIPAA. You don't want to violate FERPA either. A child's gender and sex is shown on their school records, should not be disclosed. Do not start playing games along those lines. There are also other federal protections. 14th Amendment Equal Protections Clause, First Amendment that relates to, that crosses over into issues in regard to dressing and how you express yourself, certain generalized rights to privacy. We are, Indiana as well as Illinois and Wisconsin are part of the Seventh Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, which has been on the cutting edge for maybe the last 20 years in terms of law supporting individuals who are LGBTQ, and specifically individuals who are trans and non-binary. Crossover application of Bostock, again, someday over, if you want to grab a beer, I'm more than happy to talk about Bostock and how that influences Title IX. So that you don't have to try to remember all of the law, I always have this just really simple legal rule of thumb. When you're trying to decide how to treat a student who is trans, binary, gender diverse, and you're thinking, well, are these protections something I have to provide or not? Fall back to this. If common human decency calls for honoring and respecting somebody and finding a way to respect a child so that they can be who they are, default to that every time. Ultimately, you can't go wrong that way. What's happening on the ground is that trans non-binary kids have become the new wedge issue. So they're also the students who are probably going to be hurting the most. And that is not to say that kids who are LGBT are not. They are, the stats are horrible. That's not my conversation for today. But know that this is not solely related to trans non-binary kids, but boy, are they getting it they're hurting right now. Terminology. Gender identity is someone's deeply held sense or psychological knowledge of their own gender. And I'm going to roll through these. Transgender is an individual who's transgender, like myself, is someone whose gender identity, my understanding of myself, does not align with what the doctor said at the time that he got to make the decision as to what letter went on my birth certificate. It is an adjective. It is not a verb or a noun. So you do not transgender, and there are not transgenders. It's not a noun. Transgendered is no longer used as an adjective. Cisgender is just a way to, it started for individuals who are trans trying to identify, as opposed to saying, well, this person is non-trans. The better way to phrase it is just that this person is cisgender or cis, that their gender identity aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. And it's also a reminder for all of the individuals out there who are cis that there are different alignments between gender identity and the sex that was assigned at birth. Non-binary, we've talked about already, so I'm going to just kind of roll through this one just in terms of it relates to individuals who do not fit the gender binary in any number of ways. Gender expression. It's what the term says. It's how you express yourself in terms of your dress, your grooming, your voice, the mannerisms that you use. Those are all gender expressions. And for whatever reason, we assign certain masculine or feminine designations to certain types of appearance or dress. And it's really just in many ways cultural. Gender expansive is just another term that you will hear used at times. A lot of parents tend to use gender expansive, gender creative. Gender nonconforming is used. I just saw it on a request for a grant proposal from the federal government. Personally, I don't like it because there's judgment built into the term. Because it says that somebody's gender is not conforming with some rule that exists. And this isn't about whether I want or don't want to conform. I'm just being who I am. So I have issues around non-conforming. Queer, please know this term has been taken back by the LGBTQ+ community. In the same way that other minority communities have taken back certain derogatory terms that were used for them in the past. But also know that, as is true for other groups which have taken back words, queer is used by individuals who are LGBTQ. It is not used by individuals who are not. So unless for some reason you're in a group where they've made it very clear it's cool for you, it's not your term to use. You're going to end up creating more issues than you ever wanted to. Intersex, oh my God, there's a whole 15, 20-minute conversation around this, but individuals who are intersex are the best possible indicators of why gender and gender identity and sex are so different, because there are, God, last time I did some looking, 40 to 50 different reasons why individuals, chemical, electrochemical, genetic reasons, why individuals' primary and secondary sexual characteristics develop in ways that don't fit the usual and common pattern that we expect. The reality is we are electrochemical factories. I'm not saying we don't have soul, that does not exist, but we are electrochemical factories. That's how our bodies operate, and switches don't always work. Know this, sexual orientation, gender identity, totally different concepts. Don't mix them. Ally, that is somebody who advocates for and supports a community other than their own. And yo, that is you. And maybe you're more than an ally. I am an ally of other communities, of which I am not a member, and I advocate and support for those. I advocate and support those communities. We all can be allies. So what can you do to support the kids who come through your office, your school, who happen to be trans non-binary? I am happy to ask, and I will give you, because we will not get through all of these in time, my easy to ask analytical tool. So just ask yourself this, even if it's not one of the items that we will talk about. If a policy, a practice, or a system, if changing, making certain changes in a policy, practice, or system will advance a gender diverse child's social, emotional, or academic success, should you try to make those changes so that they are more successful socially, emotionally, or academically? Come on, it's a gimme. The answer is yes. Why would you not do it? You would do it in any other situation. Of course, you would want to do it for somebody so that they feel more comfortable with themselves as who they are. So start with some of the short things to mention. Start from here. Please see the child as a human being. They are not a curiosity. And we do this all the time. I did a presentation several months back for an organization that helps individuals who are vision impaired find new employment. Had an individual who was visually impaired tell me this story afterwards that she got into an Uber or Lyft. They had hardly gone a minute when the driver said to her, because she had a cane with her, and he said, "So how do you get around in the world blind?" And the first thing that came up for her was, who the heck do you think you are asking me this question? And why am I supposed to explain my life to you? Same thing applies for kids who are trans non-binary. It's not their job, one, to explain to you. Two, they are not a curiosity. They are just other human beings who have differences that are not quite the same as yours. You're different also. People don't have a right to treat you as a curiosity because of your differences. So reframe that attitude. It's that piece that will go for you because it is true to all of us. The piece of, oh my God, this is so much work to learn all of this, and I have to go through this, and now they're going to be demanding this and that and blah, blah, blah. Instead, just appreciate and celebrate that this is an incredibly rich and diverse world, that there are experiences that are not yours. Have you ever been to a party where everybody is exactly the same as you? I will tell you that going to a party that's just lawyers, it is the most boring thing in the universe. Now, people might say that it has to do with being a lawyer, but it has more to do with the fact that everybody's experience is the same as yours. There's beauty in diversity. Stop blaming the child for being who they are. I have just seen this happen again in a school. A teacher in front of a counselor says to the child, if you didn't look the way you do and dress like this and act this way, people wouldn't be bullying and people wouldn't be bullying you. So the blame went to the child. And I would at least suggest that it's easier for some individuals to blame the child than to have to do the work to change the system. So if you would only be like everybody else, we wouldn't have to do this work. That's just cruel to say that to any human being, and to blame them that they brought on an attack. Stop diminishing and interpreting an individual's experience because it's not yours. I was at a school at one point, an incredibly well-meaning teacher, very supportive of some of his trans non-binary students, not supportive of others, because he had known that one of the students had, a couple of the students, he had potentially abusive situations at home that they had had to deal with at some point. And so he drawn the conclusion that, I don't know that I can really trust that they are non-binary like they say they are. This really could be more about, their situation growing up at home. So it's not his experience, so he can feel free to diminish somebody else's experience. Be careful about that. We all do it. All of us do it. And I tell you a long story around it, but no, don't have time. Don't overcomplicate. Your students, the kids that you work with, the adults you might happen to know who are trans and non-binary, they don't want to discuss and parse gender theory with you. This is not how they want to live their lives. Only individuals like myself who absolutely love advocacy will be willing to do that. And I don't do that on my off hours. So don't think that they are going to be wanting to have these long and deep conversations with you. And don't expect and don't ask, and this happens all the time, your students to teach you. This happens with those of us who are trans non-binary and in the course of our lives have seen therapists. Many of us have come across therapists who have asked us to explain what it means to be gender diverse. It's not my job. Go get an education, listen to seminars like this, catch other Counselor Connect seminars, find additional seminars. Just don't pull anything that you happen to see off the web. Send me an email. Always happy to get you to good resources. Okay, I'm going to give you like 2 more and then I'm going to stop because I'm already past talking time. I should be letting you ask questions. Ask the student what name they use. Stay away from, so what name, and this also applies to, the slide is further down. Ask someone what pronouns they use. Stay away from, so what are your preferred pronouns? Judgment built into that statement. Preferred means that, no, these aren't really necessarily your pronouns. This is like ice cream. What do you prefer today? Don't ask, just ask what name somebody uses. The very last thing that I will touch on for the moment, don't get hung up on the fact that it's not their legal name. And there's a corollary to that. Most of us don't use our legal names. I was in my 40s when I found out that my mother's first name was actually not her first name. I had actually never known what her legal name was. Did it change who my mother was to me? No. So if somebody's using a name that's not their legal name, don't get all excited about it. Last thing I will tell you, and then I will take questions, is please, please, please release that abiding or sudden need to be the grammar police. And it is easy to do. I grew up as a slightly frustrated English major, went to a great books program for university. And so I love the well-placed semicolon. When I see it used well, I think that is incredible. I despise the preposition that's hanging at the end of the sentence and there is something wrong with it. There is an object that is supposed to be attached to that preposition. Why is that preposition not back where it belongs? And so for me, when I first heard that some of the pronouns that were used by individuals who are non-binary was they, them, that piece of me went, no, how dare you use a plural pronoun for a singular human being? This is wrong. There was a point at which I had to tell myself to just chill, that it doesn't change the universe that plural pronouns are used at times. And the reality is that we do use them all the time. Walk into a restaurant, somebody's left their cell phone behind. You sit down, you see it, your friend who's there, you turn and say, I wonder if they know that they left their cell phone behind. Do you think they'll be coming back to get it? Do I give it to the waitress? What do I do? We use them all the time when we're not certain which gender applies. So, okay, I am way beyond the time that I said that I would talk. I will stop my share and questions.
Emma, there was a question a little further up. I'm going to ask. Let me scroll up to that in the chat. Rebecca asked, 12-year-old student is gay and he told his mom, who says, I love you, but I don't agree with it. She told him not to tell the stepfather, and the student hasn't told the stepfather and is fearful of his reaction. The counselor said, I listened supportively and asked him what do you think you should do? And he said, don't tell him. At school, everyone has an understanding that the student is gay and has a good core group of friends. As a school counselor, should I just let him lead and then I follow where he wants to go? Do you have any reaction to that or anything that you want to share?
Yeah, start from here. Go with, and we even talk about this in terms of bathrooms for trans non-binary kids. Ask them what feels the safest and most comfortable for them. They will know the situation around them. If the student says that that they've been instructed not to say something to the other parent, and that feels correct to them, honor that. One, to do otherwise is outing the child. Two, you're potentially setting the child up for abuse. And I will also, just as a side note, mention that in Indiana, this is really tricky. Because where I come from in Illinois, there are specific regulations that protect the student's privacy on this issue, where it doesn't have to be shared with the parents. And when you think about the fact that 40% of all homeless youth are LGBTQ, you understand why that's the case. But Indiana does not have those protections, at least as I understand Indiana law. I would just ask, as a human being, asking for other human beings to be able to be as safe as possible, that unless you're in a situation where you absolutely have to disclose that you please stay away from it. If the child thinks it's not safe, it's not safe. And maybe they're wrong. But this is a really lousy time to substitute your judgment and find out that you're the person who's wrong. So, anything else?
Any other questions that you want to add to the chat, or you can always turn on your camera also and ask. We'll give just a minute here if anybody wants to add anything. In the meantime, I am going to go ahead and link into the chat the session evaluation. I will share that. Any other questions for Emma?
Oh, happy to.
If we don't have any other questions, I will go ahead and share my screen to close the session. And
Amanda, can I mention one other thing?
please, yes, please.
Because I always keep a sheet of my slides. The one other thing I'd really like to, since I have a moment to advocate for, if you don't have, start a GSA in your school now. They used to be called Gay Straight Alliances. It's now Gender Sexuality Alliance is the terminology that's usually used for the GS because gay straight was somewhat exclusive. And here's the reason, and it should be started in middle schools. This is based on the most recent survey from GLES and over 200,000 kids. In schools that started a GSA early, LGBTQ plus kids were less likely to hear slurs regarding their sexual orientation, less likely to hear slurs about gender expression, less likely to hear negative remarks about individuals who are transgender. They reported that school officials were more likely to step in when there were negative comments made about homophobic and transphobic comments made. If that GSA exists for whatever reason, it triggers staff and administration to be more conscious. Students were less likely to feel unsafe, less likely to miss school. I mean, the whole goal of this is education. And if you can do anything that makes it safer for your kids to be there, that GSA is a way to do it. Lowers levels of victimization regarding orientation, identity, and expression. More supportive staff, more accepting peers, a greater sense of belonging to your school community. So anything you can do, not only to start, but to support a GSA is critical.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Final advice there. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. Please jump in if you do have other questions and we will address those. Again, I want to thank you, Emma, for sharing information today, sharing your experience with us. I really think and hope that what you shared today will help students in Indiana. So really appreciate your time and advocacy for this group of students. So thank you very much. A few quick things before we end the session. Again, please complete that evaluation. This information does help us with planning future sessions and professional learning. But additionally, if you want to receive PGP points or CEUs for license renewal, to receive those, you do need to complete this evaluation. If you are an active member of INSWA and are a social worker, you can request to receive those CEUs from INSWA using this session evaluation form. So please make sure you complete that. It is linked into the chat for you. Also want to share some other upcoming Counselor Connect events that you'll see here. We have one coming up in early December on navigating the wellness of students and staff and responding to community concerns regarding SEL. I think many of us have experienced the community or some organizations in the community voicing concerns about SEL. So if you're interested in hearing a little bit from a district in our state about how they are responding to this, please feel free to join us for this session. Registration for all of these events, it can be found at this link here shown on the slide. And then finally, I want to just thank our partners, ISCA, INSWA, the Department of Education, and the many school districts around the state who are serving on our 4 Counselor Connect tactic teams. And then finally, here you'll find contact information for Counselor Connect, social media channels, our monthly newsletter. If you want to subscribe to that, you can do so here. If you want to go from being a viewing participant of Counselor Connect to a member of one of our tactic teams or a paid content contributor, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know that you're interested in that. With that, again, thank you so much for joining us. I will follow up with an email in the next day or two, and we'll share a link to this recording. And also we'll share some handouts or slides from Emma. So with that, thank you so much again, and have a wonderful day.
Bye.